Welcome, everyone, to the second UGB Steering Committee meeting. I'm Therese Kohler, the chair of the committee. Vice chair is Abi Chaudhuri, and I think he's on his way. My role is to lead the meetings, make sure we stick to the agenda, and keep the meeting moving along, ensuring that all voices have a chance to be heard and to be there for you with comments and concerns about the process as we go along. If you are a visitor or part of the ex officio group and wish to make a public comment, please use the sign-up sheets that are in the back of the room. Thank you all for your participation on the committee. We have a full agenda today. Before we get to that, I want to acknowledge the feedback received from the first meeting regarding the desire for additional time for committee discussion. So we have built that into the agenda, including 25 minutes to reflect on the first meeting and to ask additional questions or have time for discussion on issues raised. We will ensure that adequate time for discussion is part of each agenda and have noted what specific feedback we desire from the committee from each agenda item. With that, I'll turn it over to Scott Woodford, City Community Development Director.
Thank you, Chair. Appreciate that. Welcome, everyone, to the second meeting for the steering committee. Welcome to our members of the public and our ex officio members. We're glad to have you, and anybody who's on Zoom, welcome here. So I think we need to go do another round of introductions. I know we'll just do this one more time, but I think it'll help us remind each other who everybody is. And maybe if you want to have an affiliation that you want to mention. I think we have some new folks here that weren't here last time as well. So let's just go around the room real quick and get that out of the way. So Matt, why don't you start?
Matt Hasty with MIG, and I'm the consulting team project manager, and it's great to see you all in person here today instead of just the 2D me on the screen.
Hi, I'm Mel Peterson, of course, Sisters community member, come from a fourth generation ranching farming background family, and I'm currently, I work for the Roundhouse Foundation here in Sisters as the director of their foundation operations.
John Tehan, and I am a property owner in the study area.
Jennifer Letts, Sister City Council. Morgan Greenwood, Sisters resident. Day job is government affairs with Central Oregon Builders Association.
Bill Willits, Five Pine Lodge, and Mackenzie Meadow Village Development, both in Sisters.
Therese Kohler, I live in Grand Peaks, and I'm on the Urban Forestry Board and also work with SCLI, Sisters Community Leadership Initiative.
Art Blumenkron, I'm on the Planning Commission. I've been in Sisters for about 9 years, and I've also done some live work development here in town.
I'm Susan Hallenberg. I've been in Sisters for about 3 years. I live just north of town in the preliminary study area.
My name is Brian Matolius. My wife and I rent a home at Saddlestone.
Rick Ritzman. I'm on the Planning Commission and been here for 8 years, but I'm a native Oregonian.
If any of our ex officio members here would like to introduce themselves as well. Kristen? Jennifer? Is there any other ex officio members here? I guess welcome to the members of the public. You don't have to identify yourself if you don't want to. Maybe you do. Sorry, it's not you. It's me. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Jessica Frankel.
Welcome here. Welcome, everyone. Sir, do you want to identify yourself? Thank you. All right. We do, I guess think we're missing a couple of folks, a couple committee members, and then we're still short a forest representative. We're trying to get a forest representative on board. Ian Reed, the district ranger, he stepped down from the board after the first meeting. He just thought that it might be a little too much of a conflict of interest with his position. He felt that he could be better, he could serve this process better by being on an ex officio member, which he said he'd participate in meetings and help provide his expertise when needed. So that's why he's not here. So one couple, yes, ma'am.
Do you want to introduce those online?
Oh, thank you. I can't see the screen, so yes, please, if you're on the call here, identify yourself if you would.
Good afternoon, Andrew Parrish with MIG. I work with Matt Hasty there, and I'm a land use planner.
Hi, folks. My name is Nicole Mardell. I'm a planner for Deschutes County, and I'm ex officio for this committee, but here if you had any questions about, county process. Thanks.
All right, thank you all. So just wanted to review some of the steps we're taking for public engagement and outreach throughout this process. I think we've noted that public input is very valuable throughout this process. You guys are one component of that, but we also want to reach out to the general public out there. And one of the tools that we do use or have used in the past is what we're calling a community conversation. Instead of having open houses where, 5 people come and attend the meetings. We found it much more valuable to actually get out in the community, get into the offices and the rooms of where people are actually meeting and go to them, because that's much more effective that we found in getting feedback. So these community conversations are something we did with the comprehensive plan. And I think we did about 20 of them, 20 to 25, and found them to be very effective, and it's something we want to replicate through this process. Last time staff did the majority of them, but we felt with this committee and the knowledge that you guys are accumulating in your connections in the community, that there might be some interest in you guys actually leading some of these and to kind of extend our reach out into the community farther than just what staff can. And so I've got a list here of different groups that we could think of, and I'm sure there's more that we missed, a few that we've missed. So I'm going to pass it around, and as the meeting goes, if you could just kind of take a look at it, and if you're interested, put your name next to one of the groups, or if you don't see a group that you want to talk to, there's some blank rows in there that you can add the actual add the group that you want to talk to. And we will help supply you with all the meeting materials and kind of talking points and ways to collect ways to collect the input and get it back to the project team in an organized manner. So we'll have all those tools for you to make it easy as we can for you. We don't expect you necessarily to be the experts on the subject yet, but we sure think that you, if you're interested, could have enough knowledge to apply what you know so far and to connect people, if you don't know, with the information that we have available with the website, and city staff and the consultant are all here to help. So you could you could do as much as you want. If it's just basic information, that's fine. If you want a staff member to be there to help out, let us know. We could do that as well. So I'm going to pass this around, and if you want to kind of start that out, that would be great. Just one more quick item before we get going to the next step is that I've had a few requests for sharing of emails between the committee members, some folks who are interested in maybe conversing back and forth with some of your fellow committee members. As a general rule, we'd like the committee discussions to happen amongst the committee in the committee of environment. But we understand that there might be some situations where those kind of communications might be warranted. We would, if you're interested in doing that, we would, number one, make sure that everybody's okay with having their email shared. And I think maybe through this process, we already have, but, and two, that if you do have these conversations, that you copy at least staff on those, so that we're kind of aware of what the tenor of the conversation is, and we can help, be ready to be prepared to respond to those issues in some format. So Can you just give a little show of hands if you guys are comfortable with that kind of format, everybody? Rick, you not comfortable with that?
I'm sorry. Okay.
Okay, everybody, anybody have any concerns? Okay, all right, well, you'll see an email from me with that, just kind of getting that going. You guys probably have seen the snacks behind you. I hope you can avail yourself of those. One warning about the microphones, they're obviously very touchy and sensitive. And we found that sometimes your phone, if it's close to the microphone, can cause it to provide some feedback. Sometimes rings do it, and sometimes it just does it for reasons we don't know. So apologize for that feedback. It can get annoying sometimes, but. So any questions on any of that before we move on? Okay. So the second agenda item is in response to some of the feedback we got from the first meeting, in that there was some concern that there wasn't enough time to have some little deeper conversations about some of the material that we presented. So we wanted to make sure that we circled back on the first meeting and kind of open it up for folks to be able to talk about anything that came out of that meeting that you wanted us to kind of discuss with your fellow committee members or drill down a little farther on. Some examples of that are just some of the assumptions in the land needs report, concerns we've had. Some folks had a question about the 5 acres of parcel that the gentleman provided public comment on last time that is zoned and in the city boundaries, but has access issues. And there's a question of whether we should be incorporating that into our, including that as capacity when it has access issues. There was another concern about just kind of the recommendations that came out of our housing needs analysis that predicted or projected or said that our need is skewed still high to single family units versus multifamily units. There were some folks that kind of were surprised at that, especially, you know, as our community has lots of discussions about affordable housing and looking at future needs. You know, why would our biggest need be more single family units? So that came up. It was all subject of the emails that we got from a couple committee members and that we responded to in the email we sent a couple days ago. So those are just a couple examples, if that kind of primes the pump for anybody that wants to discuss those a little bit more, or anything else that you have in mind that you want to bring up. So anybody, does that stoke any conversation here? Anybody want to touch on any of those or anything else of meeting one? Brian, look like you're chomping at the bit maybe? No? Okay, that's fine. Anybody else? And I hate to put you on the spot, but we just wanted to, and if we don't utilize all this time, we can certainly incorporate it into the discussion items today that we can take more time if we don't need this time now. So.
Okay, we'll move along then. Overall project status report by Anna Parrish.
All right, thank you. I'm just going to give you a brief update of kind of where we've been and where we plan to be. You'll recognize this graphic from the prior meeting, but just for folks who may not be as dialed in or other folks in the room, we started this project in about March. We kicked it off this year. We've been working through kind of the logistics of getting this project underway and looking at the land need report, which collects a lot of information that the city has put together over the last several years. And we've been putting together a draft of that. Maybe this graphic says finalized land needs, but I think there's going to be some kind of bookending of that's happening, but I wouldn't call those final at this point. Right now, we're focusing on the study area that we're required to use for the UGB expansion. And we expect this to go through about the end of next month to put together a study area report that includes the materials that we're talking about today, taking your feedback and incorporating that, and also taking the same material to Planning Commission and City Council and getting their feedback before rolling it into an updated report. I'm looking forward into the fall and winter. we're going to be creating and evaluating alternatives for the potential expansion area. So what might different expanded UGBs look like? What are the pros and cons of those based on the framework that the state lays out? Early next year, we're going to be selecting a preferred alternative that is going to be the kind of the meat of a lot of public engagement, a lot of discussion with this committee and others. And then we expect findings and adoption to occur kind of through spring and summer of next year. At the tail end of this process, if there's time and interest and budget left over, we can do some additional area planning tasks that are kind of about urban design, infrastructure, zoning issues, all the stuff that comes along with urbanizing land. So we can kind of take a shot at that and set up the framework for the city going forward. So are there any kind of clarifying questions about project schedule at this point? I'm not hearing any.
Doesn't look like it, Andrew.
Okay. Well, then I will go ahead and move along to the next agenda item, which is a little bit of kind of legal requirements of the state of Oregon and what that might, what that is starting to look like in terms of the study area for the UGB. So the law that is relevant here is a part of Oregon Administrative Rule 660240065. And that's called the establishment of the study area to evaluate land for the UGB. So this is kind of just here for reference. These slides will be kind of available for folks. But generally speaking, the study area, the city needs to create a preliminary study area, and this needs to include everything in the city's acknowledged urban reserve. So the City of Sisters doesn't have one. All lands that are within half a mile of the current urban growth boundary, and all exception areas, which in this case means rural residential land that's contiguous to the exception area that's within 1/2 mile and 1 mile of the current UGB. So basically, if you have any of that rural residential land that's within 1/2 mile of the UGB, you follow that out to 1 mile, and everything contiguous there becomes part of the study area. And lastly, at the discretion of the city, the study area may include land that's beyond that distance. For the following reasons, the land is not practicable to serve with public facilities. If you can see the slide too, maybe you can just read it as well as I could. But the land that's subject to significant hazards because of flooding and landslides, and if it's in one of these categories of significant scenic, natural, or cultural or recreational resources, or if it's owned by the federal government and managed for primarily rural uses. So this is how we put together the preliminary study area based on those criteria. And it includes all land within 1/2 mile of the city UGB today. It includes exception land that is within 1/2 mile and contiguous out to 1 mile. And we don't recommend doing any exclusions at this point, and we haven't done so in the preliminary study area. So just to keep us moving here, we've kind of taken an inventory of what the land out there is zoned, and we have some maps here that are available kind of for reference, and they're in the packet as well. But we're looking, I think the point of this slide, the big takeaway is that there is about 1,000 acres of that rural residential 10 land within the 1/2 mile boundary, a 1/2 mile buffer from the urban growth boundary, and there's over 2,000 acres if you go out to 1 mile. And that is the first category of land that we're required to look at in order to meet new urban needs for the City of Sisters. So the toll gate subdivision and crossroads here are, they're labeled on a couple of these maps to show that they are not within a half mile from the current urban growth boundary. So they don't meet that criteria of being within half a mile and then contiguous out to a mile, is what we would look at. So they are not included in the draft study area. This in yellow here is the land that is included in the study area. That's the contiguous exception land in the rural residential 10 county zoning designation. I mentioned the conservation easement briefly a minute ago, and federal land, and then we narrow it, or we clip that here to this draft preliminary study area with no exclusions. So just a little bit of information about that study area. It's about 4,340 acres, and there is nearly 2,000 acres of exception land in that preliminary study area. And just as a reminder, we're looking for something like 250 acres of residential and employment land to meet the city's forecasted growth needs. So we've got a big study area with a lot of exception land, and we're looking for a smallish amount that makes the most sense for the city to grow into. Just a little bit more kind of information that when I mentioned that we have to look at that exception land first, this is what's required by the state. So the first priority of land that you have to look at to meet that need is exception land. There's a priority 2 that doesn't really apply in Sisters. The third priority is resource land that is not high quality farmland. And the last priority is high quality farmland. So you have to go through each of these categories, see what land is available to meet the need. If there isn't enough land, you can go to the next category. It's a pretty rigorous process. So this map shows those in colors here. So the green land is that priority 1, rural residential land. And then the other priorities are shown here as well. And we've included kind of a visual indicator of what 250 acres looks like, just to give you some like visual idea of what it is we're trying to accomplish here. And that 250 acres, like I said, is a rough figure. It'll be more gross acreage if we have to make assumptions about, or as we go through and make assumptions about existing homes, need for new kind of roads and infrastructure, that will grow a little bit into kind of a gross acreage figure, but it still gives you a ballpark of the amount of land that we're working with here. So I will stop there. Hopefully internet supported some communication there. So please let me know if you have any other questions at this time.
We heard you, so any questions?
Hi, Andrew. Yes, I have a question. When we're looking at the 4,340 acres, and let's say we found 150 acres and 100 acres, can it be in bits and pieces what gets recommended, or does it have to be in one contiguous chunk?
It does not have to be in one contiguous chunks. You can have various locations of growth. I think it's probably not a great idea to have like cherry stem developments where you maybe annex a little bit along the road and then have something out this way. But there's kind of pros and cons to various configurations, which will be part of the alternatives evaluation process.
Okay, thank you.
If I may.
Oh, go ahead.
Thank you. Andrew, to build on the previous question, just to confirm that patchwork annexation is not permitted though, correct? That all parcels annexed do need to be contiguous to each other and to existing UGB?
That sounds like a city question if it's about annexation specifically. As far as the urban growth boundary, you can have various configurations of the urban growth boundary, but it does need to be contiguous to the UGB in some manner.
I'll just add to that briefly. It does need to be contiguous to the existing UGB. Although you can have, like Andrew said, not advisable, but you can have like a cherry stem expansion where you expand land along or within 100 or 200 feet or whatever road and then grab a bigger piece outside of that. That's possible. You can have there's not a state rule or a law that says all of the area within the expansion area has to be contiguous to itself. You could theoretically have a hole in there. It would not be advisable. We would not really recommend that because it just creates a weird situation. It's not particularly efficient in terms of servicing the area, having growth. You're probably better off instead of leaving that if you had an area within the expansion area that, for instance, had a conservation easement on it or had natural resource constraints or natural hazards constraints, you're better off dealing with that in a regulatory way than with like leaving it outside the UGB and having a weird hole or island or something within the UGB. So that's what I would say. But we did check with the state about that question because my initial assumption was, oh, it's got to all be contiguous to itself, but there's not a rule that says that. So yeah, a little bit of leeway there. But so there's sort of what you're required to do in that regard. And there's what maybe makes sense. And we've got to evaluate these different expansion areas in terms of all these factors. And one of them is the efficient use of land and the ability to cost effectively serve these areas with public facilities and services. So if we got to that point, we would start to say, oh, that might not make the most sense if we're looking at some different configurations. Some had weird islands and some didn't. We'd probably roll that out. I'm not saying we absolutely would, but that would be a factor in how we thought about it. So that was a lot of words to answer a short question, but does that make sense to folks generally? Answer the question. Okay.
So I was trying to absorb what you said, but you can have property landlocked?
User question. I think.
In other words, if you have a piece that is not in the UGB and they're surrounding it with UGB,
Legally, you could have that.
you can.
Yes. Again, when we talked to the state about this, they said they would not advocate for or recommend that, but there's not a law that says you cannot do that.
Okay.
Yeah, a little surprising to me, I'll say, but that is what we've heard. Yeah, up to this point. So
I just want to clarify something. I think it got mentioned that in terms of the contiguity for annexation, it has to be contiguous with existing city boundaries. I think I mentioned that contiguous to UGB, it has to be contiguous to existing city boundary to be annexed. In other words, it can't have a gap between, here's a city, here's county land, and city up here. You can't have a gap. It's got to be contiguous.
again, that's
1/6 contiguous. Is that a rule here, or am I thinking Colorado?
maybe Colorado, but I would say, that's the next step. So we're sort of a little bit mixing processes or apples and oranges or something. So like, we're here, this process is to identify a UGB expansion area. Once that's happened, once the UGB is expanded, then annexation can occur after that. And that's what Scott's clarifying, that once annexation can occur, that annexed area has to be contiguous to the existing UGB. So you can't just like have a UGB expansion area that looks like this and annex something out here if it's not contiguous to the UGB. The existing city limits I should say. Yeah, correct. Yeah. So.
I saw that Susan had a question.
And this might be too premature at this point. I was just about like some of the preserves that are along Indian Ford. Are there conservation easements on those, like Camp Polk Preserve and Indian Ford Meadow Preserve? Because it just didn't seem like it was reflected that way on the map, and that seemed like that would impact, you know, the acreage that was available in that area.
That sounds like a pretty good segue if we want to move into that, that part of our conversation.
I don't know the answer to that question. I was wondering if our county ex officio member is still on or not, but something that we'll definitely look into a little further. I don't believe so, but
Yeah, we don't know yet either. We're in the process of, in this committee meeting, sort of the start of that process, but we're in the process of describing and defining that entire study area in a little more detail. So we've started to kind of say, okay, here's what it looks like. Here's how it matches up in terms of those different priorities we have to look at in terms of, you know, what gets included or not. But we haven't got to the point of investigating that. We know about the school district conservation easement, but we don't know at this point about other conservation easements that may or may not be in place out there. The thing I would say is that, you know, you saw those areas on the map that represent natural resource area or natural hazard constraints. And so those are because those areas are in riparian areas or floodplains or steep slopes. And typically, two things I'd say about those is one is that they would not, for the most part, count as like developable capacity. So when we're looking at expansion of the UGB, those are for the most part considered not developable, especially if the city has regulations that they would impose that would say, you know, no development within X feet of a riparian area or within a floodplain or whatever. And the other thing is we'd still likely include them in the expansion areas and deal with them through a regulatory process down the line. But we need to evaluate them as part of this evaluation of environmental, social, economic, and energy impacts when we're looking at different potential expansion areas. That would be one of the environmental impacts we look at is what's the environmental impact of bringing that area into the UGB, good or bad, you know. Any other questions on what Andrew's presented? And then we are gonna like ask.
I have one question.
Yeah.
So it would seem like you would want to, if you could get everything to be contiguous in terms of running water and sewer and services. And then also in terms of not having spread, you would want to be as close as possible to the existing city limits, right?
I'll take a shot at that and I'll say all other things being equal, yes, but there are also things we're going to look at in terms of, again, sort of efficiency of development. And so if you had one contiguous area, but it had pretty small parcel size and sizes and a lot of existing expensive homes on it, and you're not going to get that much out of development, it was going to be really hard to redevelop it. That's another factor we have to think about. If it's got some of those natural resource or hazard areas in it, and there's adverse impacts of bringing them in, again, in terms of environmental impacts, that's another thing we have to consider. So I think that's like absolutely a thing we would want to consider. And I think if we look at those kind of areas, they would kind of score high from that perspective, certainly from the ability to serve. But there's other things we got to look at and kind of balance as well. But I think really good question, and it's definitely something we'd be thinking about. And Andrew, I can't see you, so feel free to interrupt me or chime in before, beat me to the punch if you have answers to any of these questions.
Will do.
Are we going to go into more in-depth discussion now? Okay. Preliminary study area discussion with Matt.
All right. So what we've done so far, and this is going to be kind of me and Andrew, me talking to you and Andrew sort of zooming around the preliminary study area. And I think what we want to do with all of you is we've identified this preliminary study area. We've kind of separated it into these different potential evaluation areas. Some of them are in that like top priority, right? They're in those existing exception areas. Some of them are not, they're lower priority. We may not even really get to them in terms of a more in-depth evaluation, depending on how the evaluation goes of the top priority areas. But we did want to start to look at these each individually, say a little bit about our observations about them from afar, let's say. I'm here today, but I'm generally afar. And then just get your take. Like, we want to know what you know about each of these areas. And what we want to focus on, at least to some degree, is what you think about them in relationship to the things that we have to ultimately evaluate. So again, ability to serve with water and sewer, ability to develop relatively efficiently, environmental or energy impacts associated with them, and impacts on farm or forest land or operations that might be in that area or nearby. So like those are our primary things we have to evaluate. You don't have to talk about, you could talk about other things too, like just things you know about these different sub areas, but that's kind of what we want to spend a lot of the rest of the meeting until we exhaust the topic. But reserve some time for members of the public to chime in at the end as well and then talk about next steps. But we'd reserved about like 50 minutes for this, and I think we're actually ahead of schedule, so we could spend even a little more time than that if you want. So that's what we're going to do, is we're going to kind of step through these different areas. I think we're going to take them in order, starting with one. Andrew will put a little bit of information on the screen, talk about it, then we'll turn it over to you, have you talk about it. And so we've got, sorry to have to keep turning it around. We've got 7 of these areas. So think of it as like, we might spend less time on the first few. I think probably we want to spend more time on areas like 5, 6, and 7. But let's spend some time on each of these areas and see what y'all have to say. So I think Andrew, go for it in terms of
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I have a map that I'll throw on screen in just a second that will kind of allow us to zoom around and look at the aerial photos and some of the layers that we have available to us. And we also have the county's kind of tax lot information system that we can pull up some specific details about certain pieces of property if we want to. So let me go ahead and stop sharing, and I'll share my other application here.
Yeah, and so maybe I'll also introduce each area just with the information that's in the document that we sent you out beforehand while Andrew's getting ready to kind of look at things on the screen as well. So the first ones, we call it UGB South. It's the forested area directly south of the city, primarily made up of land managed by the Forest Service and some privately owned land. There's a mountain biking trail system through that area, also a creek, large private ranch in the area. And the parcels are fairly large in this area, generally in the kind of 50 to 150 acre range. So that's the first one. While Andrew's starting to sort of bring that up on the screen, you kind of get a sense of where it is like. So
also in this area is the city's, this is a sewage treatment facility. Is that right, Scott?
Yeah. Yeah, shop and sewage treatment plant.
And in terms of zoning, I'll need to go back to my zoning map, but it's in a farm or forest zone out here. But great views, open land. Any other information that you all have or want to impart to us, we would greatly appreciate.
Yeah, from your perspective, what else is important about this area?
What's that approximate acreage?
Yeah, we haven't really broken them down to see exactly what the limits would be here, but I can try to get you a couple of very rough acreage figures. It might be easier for me to do that in an email later on, but we're probably talking
300 or 400.
Something along those lines. Yeah, I should be able to measure it.
We sort of identified them, but we didn't draw real like firm boundaries between them. So we didn't estimate acreages, but if you kind of just think about, I assume that kind of where the sewage treatment plant is, that's probably 40 acres, right?
That whole block is 106. Kind of, is it a quarter second?
Yeah.
Basically, that whole kind of the treatment plant north to where the city boundary is, all the way over to Elm, at Three Creeks Road, and then down to the bottom is about 106 acres.
Right. So it's like almost 3/4 of a quarter-mile section. I always forget what a section is. 640, but
Yeah, and also included in there is the fire district's training center, a little dog leg in there. And um, and this brings me to a question for Scott or maybe even Jordan. We do have a number of city-owned land that is all owned with the purpose of the, water treatment, sewage treatment. And in that area, but also, off to the east and kind of straddling, the blue line there. So I was just curious what advantage for the city there is to bring that into the UGB versus keeping it outside. It's kind of a mishmash at the moment. So I was just curious if there's any advantage or disadvantage to trying to make any effort along that.
Those mics don't work right now.
All right then. It's a good question. I think it's one that Paul and I need to kind of work with the county on, because one of the plans for the Lazy Z would be more than just wastewater, right? With the wetlands, would have more active recreation uses potentially there. So whether that would comply with county zoning, or whether it would make more sense to have that come under PFI and annex it. Like I said, doesn't mean we have to do it. Like, it exists today without that, right? Outside of the city, and there's plenty of cases where utilities exist outside city boundaries. I mean, a reservoir and a big pipeline is outside of our boundaries that we bring down. So yeah, good question. Don't have an answer yet, but something for us to ponder as we work on the Lazy Z project.
Part of the land needs report is that we asked Public Works Department whether they need any more space for public facilities. And at least at the time, it was identified that we didn't need any more land. So, I mean, you look at, I guess, the question ultimately comes down to Public Works input in terms of what the advantages would be and what else they'd want to build out there. But we probably would want to keep a buffer, I would think, around some of those uses, and it may not be great for housing potentially, but
Yeah, what is north, directly north of is that forest land and the gap between the UGB
it's
and the?
F1. It's
Okay, yeah.
F1 zoning.
And the city owns that as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, yep.
I would like to address zone 1 there. I guess we're calling it zone 1 or UGB South. That is a really busy recreation area, mountain bikes and that type of thing that brings in probably a lot of monetary, brings in a lot of money to the city. We have a lot of visitors that use our trail system, so that's something that we want to consider. People come from all over the country to ride on our trails here.
yeah.
So I have a
Great points.
related question. The little odd piece of land that's above the treatment facility
Fire department. training.
square there, it's not really a square. So from what I understood of Jennifer's comment, that is city owned, but it's forest. Because you've told us that we can't consider forest if we have other things to consider, is this like a moot point that we're talking about this? Because it seems to me like, yeah, let's just grab that and put it in the urban growth boundary and call it a urban reserve or however we
may-
can protect it.
Yes, it may very well be a moot point, given the size of the rural residential area to the northeast of the city. but we don't want to rule, we've got this preliminary study area, so we want to at least understand at a high level, like what's within these other sub areas and kind of have some conversation about that. But yes, if we are required first to, again, look at that priority number one land, and we have to exhaust all of that in terms of finding the equivalent of 250 acres to bring in before we start looking at these other areas. So there's not a bad chance that we won't spend a lot of time on this one, but we want to at least kind of, we're obligated to at least take an initial look at this preliminary study area. But we may pretty quickly move into the area to the northeast in terms of detailed evaluation. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks.
The exception to that, Matt, if there were to be identified public facility needs and the proximity to existing ones, would that change the consideration at all?
It could to some degree. I mean, so this UGB expansion we're looking at is to meet 20-year needs for growth of residential and employment land. That's the primary reason we're doing this, right? It is possible for cities to expand their UGBs for very specific purposes. They still have to go through sort of a similar process, but in that case, they're able to say, hey, for this purpose, we need a piece of property that's X acres in size, and they can establish a variety of other criteria that are evaluation criteria for that. So I don't know that we would be able to use that kind of process in this process, because that's not sort of what we're looking at. But other cities have done that. So for instance, I helped, it was actually a combination of Department of State Lands, Deschutes County, and the city of Redmond with a UGB expansion. And it was partly they pulled in land to expand the county fairgrounds. And so one of their key criteria was got to be next to the existing county fairgrounds. And so that land in that area trumped anything else, no matter what sort of the zoning was. But that's not really exactly the process we're going through here. So hopefully that didn't muddy the waters. But it's just sort of another sort of wrinkle or educational piece of UGB expansion and all the state requirements around it. All right. Any other thoughts on this one? And then we'll bump to the next one.
Just a note that by my quick math, we're talking about 600 acres or so out here. And as I'm looking at this, if we were to draw the boundary around it, we'd probably say, the floodplain area here along the creek is a good kind of dividing line between what it is we're looking at. Either that or Three Creeks Road. Those would be the lines.
All right. So next one's number 2. We're kind of going, I think, counterclockwise around, right? No, we're going clockwise. Sorry. Yeah, clockwise.
Just upside down clock is what I'm saying. It's still going the same direction, but we're starting at 6 o'clock.
Yeah, Sisters View South, basically the area to the west of the one we were just looking at. So kind of southwest of the city, primarily agricultural land. There's some large agricultural parcels in there. There's some, it's south of some medium density existing single family residential unit development that's within the city now. It's basically zoned for exclusive farm use. It's got some great views of the mountains. And bordered, but it's EFU now. So it's going to be kind of one of the last priorities when you think about that priority list. So, parcels range in size from like 10 to 100 acres in this area. So it's kind of a mix of parcel sizes. So again, pretty likely not going to be one we look at in a lot of detail, but any thoughts or comments beyond what we pointed out for this one?
Does that include the Pole Creek Ranch? I believe the Pole Creek Ranch is tribal owned now.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Yeah, so I would think that exclusions would be tribal lands. So it's something that we probably want to verify. I believe a tribe in Washington owns it. They owns it, okay, but not tribal land, okay.
It's probably more likely the EFU designation would kind of knock it out of early contention at least than the fact that that's there. But yeah, good. That is a good point. Yeah. Anything else on this one?
It may be an uphill battle to look at this in more detail, but it does have great access to the nearby schools. It'd be right across the street as far as walkability to those schools and downtown. So while, you know, we may think that this is, like I said, an uphill battle, I don't think it should be necessarily excluded if they're amenable to it.
Okay. All right, thanks. Anybody else on that one?
That is level, that is all, that is Roundhouse Foundation.
Yeah.
And Bull Creek, so.
Yeah, again, we'd have to exhaust possibilities in the exception areas before we even were able to identify some portion of this area as a possible specific expansion area, basically. All right, I'm just gonna keep us rolling around the perimeter of the city. And I'm kind of expecting when we get up to the ones that are more northeast, we might have some more discussion, and that's totally fine. So next one, number 3, the Reed Ranch area. So that's kind of west of the city, south of McKenzie Highway. It's got one large 800-acre parcel zone for forest use owned by the. Yeah, Andrew, you want to move us to either back to the map that shows the different areas? That, okay. Yeah, there we go. So we call it the Reed Ranch area, number 3. So it's you know, primarily U.S. Forest Service land, primarily or all U.S. Forest Service land. So zone for forest use. What's that? Low on the priority list. Yeah. And we purposely didn't just straight up exclude federally owned or forest land from the study area at all, but we recognize that it's pretty low on the priority list. And again, we're gonna have to exhaust the other area first before we get to it. But yeah. Anything else on this one? John, no side conversation.
Would you turn your mic on too? Would you turn your mic on? Thank you.
We were both just trying to get more of an idea of, you know, identifying that where that's at. So you're heading out on 242, correct? And then you have the Reeds on the right. And then are you also talking about there's property on the left that's not just that it is exclusive Forest Service owned or for?
So when you say the left, what do you mean?
I'm driving down the road 242.
Okay.
That'd be south, yeah, on the road 242.
Is the mustard colored section, is that Crossroads?
Yeah.
That's Crossroad, yes.
So it would be the
So
land
in
between
there,
kind of,
okay.
yeah,
You
Crossroads.
see the blue line, you see the boundary, kind of the blue line.
Okay.
So
This
we're
area,
so basically we're Pole Creek, you have Edgington that goes up, so all of that through there is,
A lot of it's forest land, forest. Service
Okay.
land.
all of this area.
so, okay.
Yeah.
So
So
then that would be, is that all F1?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So I'm just going pretty quick, which is fine. So, all right. I'm gonna go to the next one. Maybe zoom us back over to the other map, Andrew. So next one's west of Pine Street, we called it. There we go. So it's basically north of the western part of the city. Also, I think primarily Forest Service land, but it's northwest of the high school, south of Tollgate, zone exclusive farm use. And this is also where that chunk is that's got the conservation easement that's owned by the school district. So that chunk is in there as well. And just to get a sense of like scale and size of this entire area, that chunk that's owned by the school district is a quarter section. So it's 160 acres.
Part of that's owned by the Deschutes Land Trust.
owned by,
Deschutes Land Trust.
and is it owned by the school district or owned by the land trust?
Some of
by
it's
the
school
school
district and some
district.
is land trust, I
But
believe.
managed.
Yeah.
Conservation's owned by the school district.
So Matt, or maybe Andrew, really quick, in there, that dark green kind of thumbs up shaped piece of property, that's just north of my house, and so my husband is gonna be loath for me to even bring this up, because that's where we walk our dog. But, if my, perusal of Dial is correct, that dark green is privately owned, is that correct? Can you give me, or I don't know, maybe Counselor Letts has it up right here, what is the acreage of that property?
Let me try to look at that for you.
Eyeball, I'd say is about 60, but
That's two, it's a couple of parcels.
Yeah, there's several parcels here.
Bill, why don't you speak into the microphone? If you could speak into the
I could speak to that. It's an extension of Mackenzie Meadow Village. It's 59, approximately 59 acres.
What's its own?
It's farm. I'm sorry, it's forest.
F2, yeah.
It's, the Hayden subdivision ends about where you walk your dog, I would think.
It's two parcels, right? It's two parcels. Total.
There's three parcels, but it's owned by our group,
Total of 15,
the 59 acres.
59.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, can we walk the dog through there? Can we walk my dog? Is that okay? Whoops.
Luckily, Bill hasn't kicked you out yet.
Luckily, he's
You
a
and
nice
your
guy.
dog, nice guy.
So
And I did eyeball the size
that
pretty
would
well,
be
right?
West Pine Street section that would be included in.
It would be part of that section, yeah. So most of it's, or a lot of it's, managed by the Forest Service, but not that piece, but it's still zoned for forest use, right? It's still F2, slightly different designation. But yeah, that's where that's included in that area.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry, maybe Bill, I'll just ask you directly. To my knowledge, there is capacity to serve that, should that be brought into the UGB and eventually annexed, correct? And maybe Matt, this is now I'm talking to Scott. There is water and sewer capacity to serve that if that were to be brought in. Is that correct?
There's water and sewer service to the property line there.
Just due to its adjacency to
Yeah.
Mackenzie Meadows? Yeah, okay.
I mean, you can tell us whatever you'd like, but I'd be curious if, you clearly acquired that property for a reason. Have you had any discussions about the zoning on the site and future plans?
Sorry. Was that a question to
Say-
me?
That was, yeah.
I failed to wear my hearing aids, so I'm
What?
halfway here.
What?
The question was,
Yeah, we're hoping to continue to add homes on that property.
Okay.
We have infrastructure in place.
okay, so it was acquired with the idea of future development.
Right, we've already utilized 30 acres of it. It's pretty much built out by Hayden Homes. So now there's another 59 acres. It was forest land.
Same.
And the 30-acre piece 20 years ago was the only piece that came, it was the urban growth expansion.
Right, okay.
And just, I'm curious if any anecdotally, I've heard mixed things about Tollgate being, connected to the city. Because sometimes people, don't want the city to be contiguous with that neighborhood or anything like that. So I was just curious if anybody had any input on that. I've just kind of heard things secondhand, so just if we're talking about this area, just wanted to know if anybody had anything to share.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested too, but I will just note that at this point, it doesn't meet the criteria for inclusion in the preliminary.
Sure,
expansion,
and I think
but-
it's more of just the abutting.
Yeah, what people think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of having, houses right up against their property line or something, so.
So, I don't know if there's anybody around the table who has any thoughts about that.
Well, just because we're looking at possibly like zone 4 there, I'm calling it zone 4, it's area 4. That doesn't mean that we're gonna include all of that. We're gonna might grab a chunk of it.
For us, so it's down the list.
Down the-
Right, it's not on the list, but I'm just saying that we're not talking about the entire chunk. We're talking about 250 acres worth of chunk. Is that right?
Yeah, there's only that area, the dark green area is privately owned, and that's less than 60 acres.
No, but we're talking about the entire 4. That's not just that little dark green area.
Well, we're, at this point, we're just kind of looking at each of these larger areas and just getting your feedback on just conditions and characteristics and issues associated with them. And we're not necessarily proposing to include any or all of a portion of these areas. It's just more, what do we know about these areas? And like, this is a good conversation to understand, oh, well, that piece of it, that 59-acre piece is privately owned. The at least original intention of it was to continue development. At the same time, it's in this lower priority because of the zoning, but we're just trying to get a sense of, what do people think? So, and I think, the question was, well, toll gates up there, not in our preliminary study area, but close to this part of it. And do people have any thoughts about what difference does that make, or what might people there feel about, looking at this area? So I think that's just the part of the discussion.
I'm kind of curious, how, this is more of a county question, but big plots of land like Tollgate and CMR up a little further on the right, they're in the middle of the national forest, and they just got zones, they could build houses. What happened there?
I've got to guess all that preceded the statewide land use
Mhm.
planning program. So, yeah, I'm sure that was done before we had all the rules in place we're sort of working under now. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's because it's pretty tough these days to
One of the
make
reasons
that
why we
happen.
have the UGB and the state planning law, probably.
Sagebrush subdivisions, that's what Tom McCall said,
And I
right?
guess the other question is, this may be jumping ahead a little because you haven't hit the other areas yet. But if you get a prime area, it's like, it's RR10 and it's close in and everything else. And there's a bunch of houses there that are on 10 acres, and the people really like being on 10 acres and having a mini farm or whatever. Do you go out to the area and talk to people before you throw it into urban growth? Because if you do and nobody wants it, then you just wasted this whole process.
So I'm not going to completely answer your question, but I'll give it a shot and we'll see what Scott has to add, or anybody else. Definitely, we are going to let those people know that is one of the areas that we're looking at, and see what kind of comments they have. And we will have to make some assumptions about the relative efficiency or effectiveness or developability or feasible development of those areas. That will factor into our sort of thinking about, one, capacity of development, but two, just how it shakes up or shakes out compared to the different criteria we're looking at. But sort of individual property owner desire or not desire isn't a reason to not include an area. So it's not a reason in and of itself to say, okay, then we're just not going to include that. I would say that that's kind of what we have also heard from the state when we asked them these various questions about, what do the rules say? What do the rules not say?
Well, this might be jumping ahead because I think.
And we'll get into those areas real soon. And that was the next one. Number 5, I think, includes one of them. But yeah.
If you want to go to the next one, that's fine.
Okay. Anybody have anything else to say about number 4?
I just want clarification.
Yeah.
So this is probably where you're going with this. So are people able to, if we're, saying we're gonna make the decision, we're gonna expand it into this area. I mean, is there a choice of people saying, no, we don't want to be included in this?
They
How
don't
do
get to
we-
just opt out as
Okay.
individual property
didn't
owners.
think
We
so,
did
but-
ask that question of the state
But-
and that was the answer we got.
But what if the neighborhood has a CCNR? Like if you're getting into neighborhoods that have.
Well,
restricted units and-
yeah, so if the neighborhood had a CCNR that said, you can't ever add another house, this property or something like that, like we'd want to look at that in terms of, again, the criterion related to efficient development, et cetera.
Yeah.
So, and I'm beyond that, I'm not going to sit here and say, here's exactly what we're going to do, or here's exactly how that would affect our analysis, because we're not there yet, but we're headed there, right? So these are all really good questions for us as we kind of move forward. So, all right. Anything else on number
Thing
4?
to keep in mind is, this is 20 years into the future and
Yes,
property owners change and ideals change over time. So
exactly.
really, I always kind of circle back when I get in the weeds. It's like, this is long term. We gotta
Yeah.
Keep open
This-
mind.
Number
It's-
4 does have the proximity to the schools, which
Yeah.
for kids commuting to school, there is that advantage. I know it's forced and all that, but that's just one of the positives to that.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Anything else on 4? And if not, we're gonna bump to number 5. All right, Andrew, take us back real quick to that map. Perfect. Okay, so we called this one, hopefully our names of these are okay. I mean, they're just what we picked. But we called this one Camp Polk vicinity. So, this is kind of due north of the city, I guess, but northeast a little bit. And so this is part of that larger exception area or rural residential area. It's currently large lot residential uses and relatively small size of properties, anywhere from 1 to 2 acres to about 12 acres. There's not a bunch of really large properties in this area, and that's definitely has an effect on sort of the efficiency of development. And I think to some degree to the question about somebody want to develop that, they want to be in the UGB, those are factors we have to think about. So currently zoned rural residential, the Indian Ford Meadow Preserve and Camp Polk Meadow Preserves are in the northeastern edge of the area, and Indian Ford Creek runs through here. We snagged a few pictures out here. One of our folks who's on the team, Emma Quinn, who I don't think you've met yet on the screen, she was actually out here last week or the week before. So we give her credit for a lot of these photos because she did a drive around and snap some photos of these various areas. So I will just.
Previous slide you had a bunch of little line squares, rectangles. Are those the lots?
Yeah,
Okay. So it's real checkerboard.
it is. Yeah.
Yeah,
literally.
is that visible on the map currently? I can make them bigger if we want to see them.
And this particular map, I don't think we can see the parcel lines. Or maybe you kind of barely can. Yeah. Oh, actually, I can see them, but I don't know if
Kind of
anybody
faint
else
and
can
see
see.
the white lot lines.
There we go.
Yeah.
Punched them up.
I actually live in
Hold that
Crooked
layer up
Horseshoe, and one of the pictures that you
Yeah.
took was actually of my property.
Oh, you didn't kick her out. Huh? Snapped it before you were able to.
Yeah.
What are you doing, Andy?
I'll make
Or-
one other note about what we've heard about this area so far. We got a letter that I believe was sent to you from the airport that talked about some of these properties around the airport. I think they kind of are in between areas 5 and 6, but they have kind of special hangar facilities that open up onto the airport themselves. I've never actually thought about a golf course community, but it's for an airport. The houses right around it. So that's kind of an interesting situation that we learned about here.
Yeah, I will just side note, a bunch of houses like that in the city of Independence, which has a public use airport like that. And it's fascinating to me whenever I visit an area like that, just because their garages are actually airport or airplane garages. Right?
The property owner that sent the letter, did you guys see the letter? Property owner owns that little triangle to the kind of the southeast of the airstrip.
So I have a question actually about that particular letter and property.
Yeah.
I used to live in San Jose, and the way the airport developed was not a good thing for certain neighborhoods. And of course, San Jose got way bigger than anyone ever imagined it would. If I read this letter correctly, what this gentleman would like to do is add it into the UGB, his property, and make it available. I mean, he's going ahead of the game because it's not annexed and it's not zoned yet, but make it available for more of these homes that have a hangar. So just mirroring what's on the other side of the runways, which seems to me would have a danger of blocking in the runways and defining what could be done to, if you ever wanted to expand the airport a little bit or use that property for something else that more serve the entire community. It's a great spot for something that more serves the entire community. So I was just wondering, like, how in this process, if you allow that property in, but then it's not our job to further define what it gets used for, right? So our influence is limited.
So I'll give sort of a partial answer. So when Andrew was sort of talking about the steps in this process early, like the first part of the his presentation, he noted that one of our last steps that is built into this process is some planning for future growth areas. So we set aside a certain amount of the project budget to do some of that work. We don't know like what, we haven't got to that point yet. So we don't know, is there going to be just one area or is there going to be 2 or 3 areas that comprise the proposed UGB expansion? So we don't know how many areas there'll be. We don't know exactly what they'll look like. But what we said we would do as part of this process would be to identify sort of what the process looks like for that planning for future growth areas, maybe what some of the initial, at least at a policy level, requirements look like for that. What's the kind of process you want to go through as you do some more detailed planning for these expansion areas? And we said we thought we could do that, sort of lay out the framework and potentially start to work on one area. Now, if we're all like super efficient with our time, we have even more budget left, maybe we can do more of that. We don't know. But that would be a subsequent step for the city, would be some high level planning for these areas beyond just identifying what the comprehensive plan designation is, because they need to do that. We need to do that, identify what the proposed comp plan designations are for the areas that are going to come into the UGB. And that means the general land use designation, not the specific zoning designation, but the general land use designation. Is it residential? Is it commercial? Is it something else? Is it industrial? You know, those kind of things. So we may have some influence on at least one of these areas, but at probably a pretty high level, not a like, this is exactly how this area is going to be zoned, or these are exactly the kind of uses that would be allowed in there, or this particular parcel, this is what's going to happen to it. But we could also identify some sort of general policies around expansion areas, I think, as part of this process, in terms of what are the city's goals, what are the community's goals for these areas that we're talking about as expansion areas. And I'll just use the city of Bend as an example. When the city of Bend expanded its urban growth boundary a number of years ago, they updated their comprehensive plan and they identified specific policies for each of the expansion areas that came in. In their case, they had about half a dozen expansion areas around there. They also identified, in their case, policies for opportunity areas within the UGB that we're going to see further growth and development, and identified policies for those. So sorry about all that talking. I said partial answer. It was like way too much of an answer, really.
You didn't say short answer.
But I didn't say short answer. That's right. So I think the shorter answer is some influence, but maybe not down to the level of a specific property and how that would be used. But maybe the high level influence or guidance would have some bearing on that.
Kind of like to use the analogy of like we're kind of at we'll be at the 50,000 foot level with these kind of designations. Once we go forward with area planning, that'll bring it down to like the 30,000 foot level. And then when somebody comes in for like an annexation, they'll be required to do a master plan and an annexation. That'll take us down to the 10,000 foot level. And then they'll come in later for subdivisions, which will get us down to the ground level. So it's kind of this increasing level of intensity of detail as we go forward. But recognize what your point is, though. They want some assurance of what's going to go where, and it's going to take some time. That's why I think that area planning that Matt was talking about is so important, because that really gives more level of detail and gives the community some assurance of what's going to happen in those little areas.
Thank you.
Sure. Sorry to be so verbose on that one.
That was really helpful.
Other thoughts about this area? Questions, comments, just observations?
Pretty filled up already, built up with development. With bigger lots. It would be interesting to see how it could fit in with their urban growth.
Yeah, maybe I'll just jump in with the way that we account for existing development kind of in a general way when we do what's called a buildable lands inventory. And so we're in the process of doing that for this area right now. And all of these lots, pretty much all these lots will basically have a designation of partially vacant, which means there's something there, but there's a lot of land. And so where we draw the line of, what should we assume just from a planning perspective for, how much further subdivision might be possible in these areas. And along with that, there's the physical space on the land and where the buildings are currently. And along with that are the roads appropriate for that much new housing, and what would it take to upgrade those? So those kinds of ideas get filtered into that efficient kind of provision of public services and efficient use of land thinking. But we will often use something like a quarter acre in a fairly urban context, Oregon urban context for the land that's left over. The land that we assume is retained for an existing house on a lot like this, but it might be appropriate to say that there's more like half an acre or 1 acre is what folks would end up keeping for their home, and then subdividing the rest if given the opportunity. Those are discussions we'll have as we go forward.
Yeah, and just as a really rough example, what that could mean, let's say you had 100 acres worth of property that was all developed with houses on 1 acre lots each, and we reserved half an acre for each existing home. Well, we were really only talking about 50 acres at capacity, and we're talking about redevelopment that might take a long time to occur given value of homes, et cetera. So that's a factor we'll have to look at when we're thinking about these areas. So
I think, Matt, I'm glad that you mentioned value of homes, because setting aside the assumed limitations that CCNRs would put on these, I mean, these are north of $1 million homes here. Realistically, and any developer that was looking to purchase, you would have to purchase at least 3 at a time to make development worth its while. I mean, it's a lot of money to do a very little amount of development. Presumably all of these are still on septic, so there's some amount of remediation that would need to occur, like trying to fit a street network into the existing county roads seems like a nightmare. Like realistically, the redevelopment of these is not worth it would be hard to justify the expense.
all right, good questions and thoughts so far. Any other thoughts or questions about this area? All right, and absolutely more to come. Again, we wanted to kind of walk through these areas and get some initial feedback and thoughts on them, but this is going to be the subject of kind of the next chunk of the work.
Yeah.
It's really challenging. I mean, with the sort of framework we to some degree have to use, but yeah. Oops. All right. So next one, which is just kind of next door, which we called the Barkley vicinity. I guess kind of next door into the south. So southeast of the airport, north and east of the city, also zone rural residential. All 3, 5, 6, and 7 have that zoning. It's got some natural resource constraints in there, including McKinney Butte and sort of the slopes of that. Scott mentioned to me earlier that they're out doing a little drive around today, and there's some pretty steep slopes in there. That's absolutely going to affect capacity and of development, what we consider as a constrained area, and just cost of development. So that's important to note. and Indian Ford Creek running through the area. Again, a combination in this area, a combination of large lot industrial or industrial, excuse me, residential, sorry. I was thinking back to Redmond. Yeah, you're all awake. Good job. And some ag uses that are closer to the city. So those are our quick observations, but other thoughts.
Looking at the right area, there's also a big meadow area that every winter fills up with water pretty much.
Is that kind of near the end?
You'd
of
have
the
to, you'd have to
airport?
build houseboats or something there.
That right along.
Put them on stilts, no
Yeah.
basements in those.
Yeah, it's right off of the, kind of over by the airport.
But there are some big vacant parcels that are kind of right along, the south side of Barkley, and to the, I guess, to the east of Camp Polk. Or, yeah, or Locust, yeah. Yeah, you can see them right there. Huge parcels.
We have heard that
Yes.
updated wetland mapping is probably needed in the area.
Yeah, John.
Well, I'll just say that this is part of the property that we are owning, and we're there in the northeast corner. And back in 2002, we did this same type of study, and we created a matrix, and that portion there, you could call it 50, you could call it 90 acres down in there. That portion was put on in a study, and it was rated the top 3 and 4 parcels to come into the city in 2002. And the one larger parcel was owned by the Lighthouser family, and I believe they didn't want to be involved in that at that time. And that's completely changed now.
John, I have a laser pointer if you want to direct me
Yeah.
or come and grab it. Yeah. Thanks.
There we go. Okay. So we're,
Keep it pressed.
oh, okay. We're basically talking this area in through here. Right here is the pump station. That was put in when we put the sewer in late 90s. And that pump station has a 24-inch main that runs out of it going north into this parcel. The plan from HGE, who was the engineer at that time, was for that to move to the north and then to the west. And so we ended up bringing in 30 acres. And the reason for that, I think we started, Bill can tell me, what did we start with? Like maybe 150 acres were we studying back then?
Sure.
Okay.
But quite a bit of it.
It was quite a bit of acreage. We ended up bringing in 30 acres. And one of the reasons is that 30 acres was ready to develop. Lighthouser here,
Area to the south
No.
that came in.
well, that was the area that is,
Mackenzie Meadows.
Oh, got
yeah,
it.
West Mackenzie
Got it.
Meadows, right. So this property was all rated the highest to come in at that time. Really, there's only 2 houses on these. This is 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, give or take. There's only 2 houses on all of those parcels. There's no house on this parcel. There's the one house I mentioned here. There's one house here. I don't, the seed to table is there. Yeah, but that's not zone farm. That's, so just letting you know, that's how that property sits. And, you know, it has been studied in the past and it was, you know, it's a top priority.
To the east of it, if you need 250 acres.
East
That's west.
here? Oh, I'm sorry, here? Well, that's that ridge right there.
Okay,
And then that water that you were talking about runs down, oh, excuse me, I think it's,
Yeah, the ridge is over
I
further.
think it's there. That ridge is here. And
Those
then
are all developed where that.
it hasn't really filled up with water. They did some repairs down here. So
You've got that one parcel that looks landlocked.
would,
Is that right? behind
right
you?
here?
No, that looks like it has access over more the square, the complete perfect square, right behind you to there.
Yeah. Yes. Well, it's owned by, we own both of those.
Right.
So there's an easement here. But, you know, just some information about that parcel. Like I said, the pump station here was the original pump station that we put in for the sewer. And there's a 24-inch main coming out going to the north. And when we did that study, this piece was the top piece, without a doubt. Yeah, I mean, but they didn't want any part of that at the time, so.
It was a good sized piece of land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Excellent.
that's
thank you.
not the case.
Yeah, appreciate all that. Yeah. Other comments or thoughts about this area? Anything? from the other part of this
Time
area?
check a little bit here.
Oh, yeah.
So we got about 9 more minutes before we want to start the public comment. So,
in to the
So-
rest of the city.
Yeah, and maybe just quick show of hands, folks who are in the audience and do want to make sure they have something, if you have something to say, you want to talk, maybe just raise your hand so we know how much time to reserve at the end, because we want to give each a couple minutes if you have something to say. If you don't, then we'll keep talking and you can keep listening, but raise your hand if you think you're going to comment at the end.
what about Zoom?
So nobody, just content to listen? All right.
I'm not seeing anyone on Zoom.
Okay, so sounds like we can actually
Take back some of this time.
take back some time, and thank you all. And if you change your mind, let us know in the next like 18 minutes, and then we'll reserve a couple minutes. Yeah. All right, sorry to interrupt.
My wife and I live right on that northern boundary over the part that we were just discussing. I think as far as urban development of that area, I think it's a really great idea. It's close enough to downtown that you can walk. It's, I think, very good use of space to nearby jobs and businesses. It really feels like that would be a great use of urban land.
All right, thank you. All right, anybody else on this area? Yeah, or it's
It really kind of
You just turned your mic off. Sorry about that.
Look at the little red light there. Okay. It kind of mitigates urban sprawl too, because you're not going way out. It's the next
Exactly.
parcel,
Right.
you know, next to everything.
all right, thank you.
And I'll just
Yeah.
second those comments because I walk around that area a lot. And I concur that when you have a really valuable home sitting on 2 acres or 5 acres, it's unlikely, or it would be very expensive and time consuming for someone to subdivide that and put another home on it versus this land that has not been developed yet and is in a really great location for expansion.
All
How
right,
big
thank you.
is that
Yeah, great.
large square? That right there?
Is it 40 about? Yeah, it's
40?
about 40.
Yeah, 40, 10, 20, 60, 70, 80, and then it would be 90 if we went up across south on Barclay from there.
Yeah, and I would guess there's not much you deduct from it, you know, like I said earlier, like Andrew and I said earlier, in some areas, there's 90 might not equal 90, right? 90 might equal 70 or 60. In this case, 90 is going to equal pretty close to 90. You know, so does that make sense? Yeah, okay. All right, great. Let's hit the last one because there's one more and then we'll talk about that. And then we'll do kind of a quick next steps and we'll probably end right about on time. So the last one, we didn't get any pictures of it. It was a little harder to access. I don't know if any of you live in area number 7. We called that one Wild Horse Vicinity. So that's kind of the easternmost of these areas. So just east, basically the area that we've been talking about. It's sort of the other side of McKinney Butte, I believe, right? It's, you know, the other side of the ridge.
It's kind of on the.
Well, it's on the Butte.
Feels like it's on the
It's like up there.
Yeah.
Okay. Probably some awesome views, right? Yeah.
Couldn't see 'em today.
Couldn't see them today. Yeah. But so currently fairly small lots. I'm going to say 5 to, I mean, not 1 or 2, but 5 to 10 acre lots generally. Some agricultural uses, and you've got White's Creek. Did I pronounce that right? I never know if I pronounce it right. Got it pretty close? Okay, good. Awesome. Indian Ford Creek, McKinney Butte. So this area is kind of more hampered by some of those natural resources and constraints than maybe some of the other areas. And I think, you know, we just heard, yeah, there's some kind of larger lots and expensive homes up there is my guess. I haven't been up there. I think it's partly why we couldn't get up in there to take many pictures. It was not particularly, some gates kept us out, did their job.
Is that area only accessed then by Barclay? Or is there another way to get to it from 242? Is that, so
I
that,
think Barclay is the only way you can access it.
why wasn't?
There's,
Go ahead, Brian.
Well, I believe there's another way into the area with the extension of Cascade Avenue as it keeps going east. I've done some running back there. I feel like it would be a good spot to consider for many of the same reasons the areas to the north. You know, if there's landowners that are amenable to that sort of thing over there, I still think it would be worth looking into, especially the east of Cascade corridor. Yeah.
Boy, I don't know why my spidey senses are tingling. Chief Pryor, okay, I would love to know what fire mitigation would look like over there for you guys.
and you can feel free to answer because you are an ex officio member.
Yeah, it's actually looking at a property that was down there. That one little piece that comes out and has a jog in it, that's the only one that's not developed yet. But there's houses on all of them, but we look into that area and as long as the mitigation of firewise, it can be all of these communities that you're looking or the expansion into them. If we can forward think in some of those and do some of the firewise communities as we do these developments, it may help for insurance rating and things that we're looking at right now that are concerns, but water, as you're adding water lines down into their accessibility for our engines and those roads that are in there, what's going to need to be improved to meet our needs to get in there for apparatus that we're going to have or ladder trucks and those kind of things. So, but so far, all the way down Cascade to Huntington and out to there is where you're talking about that whole area. But so far it's pretty good. But once you get into Barclay and coming the other direction and down in, you have all of those properties that the roads come off of, and they're around 10 acre parcels, I believe, that go out into the meadow. And then from there up into the high elevation area from the ridge up, those are the ones that are a little bit more difficult that I think may be tough for the expansion and services, what you're talking about. But down in the flats more area, I think is a good idea.
Thank you. Thanks. Other thoughts on this area? Any other comments or thoughts?
So just clarification then.
Yeah.
So we're looking at area 7. You're saying ideally, because it's out here, you would need to, or ideally it would be bring in 6 and 7.
At least a portion of 6 would have to be included to get to 7 and
7.
bring 7 in. And at a minimum, it could be, again, per the state rules, and is not a great idea from a
To have a whole.
efficiency and serviceability sort of standpoint, but at least enough land to have utilities and a road and things like that coming across. But more ideally, you'd have a portion of 6 that was then contiguous to whatever portion of this you were thinking about, if you were thinking about it. Yeah, really good question. Yeah. Anything else on this one? All right, great. Let's see. Yeah, go ahead.
So I just
Teresa.
had one more afterthought. On
Yeah,
the
of course.
area down by the end of Cascade, and I think it's called Huntington after a while. I've walked down in there too, and I go on McKinney Butte quite a lot with my dog. And just my gut reaction to the places we've talked about and possibilities, it seems like that area would be a little risky fire-wise and unnecessarily far away from everything, from the center of town. So if there was lower hanging fruit, I think it would be more efficient to add something closer in.
Okay, yeah, thank you. All right.
And
Any-
I didn't call it out as its own study area. It's sort of unclear where it lands, but the land that's south of the creek here, it looks like it's on Willow Lane. They might be fairly slopey properties that kind of come into the creek here, but I'm just curious if there are any thoughts about these properties here.
I was gonna ask a question about going back to 6 again a little bit. John, there's some big pieces of property north of you. Do you know anything about them? Those up there.
Yes. So they're larger pieces, they have one. On the houses that are right off of Pine or Locust there, across to the south of the airport, those 4 top parcels. One of 4 houses.
Cause that seems like it would be,
Right.
cause if you needed to add more acreage, would seem like a great spot too.
Give the community garden, like just north of Barclay, right next to the airport.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, yeah, thank you. All right, and anybody have any thoughts about the area that Andrew was just asking about that's kind of, I think, farther to the south and east? Andrew, you want to swing back down there? Yeah, there we go. This area, which we didn't really call out specifically very well, but just any quick thoughts about that? It's okay if you don't, but yeah, Brian.
I'm familiar with that area south of the creek. I don't know if it's necessarily would be the best location for urban growth, because you'd be kind of beholden to the traffic on the highway, not necessarily what might, the roads might leave into town. And as far as walkability, bikeability goes, not sure if that's really an area that we should prioritize.
All right, thank you. Yeah, anybody else on that one before we leave it? Okay. Scott, anything else you want to say about any of this before we talk just a little about next steps? And
No, I was just gonna touch on next steps, but
Teresa?
Sure.
Good?
I'll just ask the audience again if anyone from the public or ex officio would like to make a comment. Now's your chance.
Going once?
and
Going
just if the mood doesn't strike you now, yeah, you can always submit them to me at the city if you have comments at any time or questions. And we can then share them with the committee if you want those shared. So if you don't think of something now, but you think of something later, please don't hesitate to send them my way.
And that goes for everybody on the committee too. If you have follow-up questions from what happened today, send them to Scott and
I'll share them with you guys.
Share 'em.
Yeah.
Yeah,
answer
absolutely.
you.
Yeah.
And Matt, I have a question about next meeting date. Is there any,
Oh, that's a good segue to Scott's next steps.
is there any idea about when that might be?
It's next week.
It's not next week, because I'm gonna.
Not
be on the
next
East
week.
Coast, so.
We talked about this in our project management team because we knew that would be something of interest. So it's kind of shaping up now that the next meeting would be towards the end of September, maybe early October, but we think we can commit to the last, potentially though, kind of on this last Thursday of the month. If this time works good for all of you guys, that time frame, is that?
Yeah, I think that's what we were thinking. It was we'd stick the same day and time. And it's likely to be in the second half of September or maybe into the first week of October, somewhere in that general time frame. And we need to sit down and huddle and kind of line out the more specific schedule for our next steps. We've got this sort of broad schedule. We actually have a moderately specific schedule that's too much to share with anybody but us. But we need to look at that and make sure, oh yes, we're still on track. This still makes sense. But that's what we're thinking very generally. And what we said too was we would do that fairly quickly. And then in terms of picking 1 week or another week, or give you a couple options, that might be what we do is circle back to you and say, we are assuming Thursday 4 to 6 this week or this week, and get a sense of, what's most available for y'all. So we'll get back to you pretty quick within I would say the next week or two. We'll be back in touch with you about a specific day, but that's the general time frame.
Okay, great. And also a question about, at what point would you see us starting the community conversation meetings?
Good question. I think fairly soon, I think we want to, there's still the need to get the information out to the community about this process. What is this process? I think there's still a need to educate folks and let them know kind of where we are in the process. So we're going to work on getting kind of this toolbox of information together for you guys so that we can give that to you and you can be successful. So I would say within the next couple of weeks, getting them scheduled, starting to get on the schedule. That's something we can do quickly, is starting to look into what the schedule of these community group meetings that you want to participate with and try to get on their agenda. That would be the first step. And then we'll get you the information that you need to do those. Matt's he's always got something to
add. I don't know, no disagreement. But I do always have something to say. Yeah, my wife's nickname for me is Chatty Matty. You probably figured that out by now. Yeah. Hey man, why not? I'm an oversharer. Everyone who knows me well knows that. So I would say yes, we probably won't be having any meetings like in 2 weeks from now, but we will want to start scheduling things. And I don't know when all these groups meet, but I would not be surprised if, again, for just some initial conversations with folks about like what we're doing. We don't have like a ton of results, but here's the process. Here's what we're doing. Here's these areas we're starting to look at. Any thoughts? Those could be happening in potentially September. And like Scott said, we're putting together this kind of set of materials for staff and for any of y'all who want to help us with this to use. So it kind of depends on, it really depends largely on the availability and interest of groups we might go talk to. And your availability and interest, and just when we can get on people's calendars, and then some on when we have materials ready to, of course. So not too far out. Yeah, I would say, maybe by early September to like start talking to people. But if somebody wanted to talk sooner than that, we had stuff ready and you were ready and Scott was ready, then Emmy was ready, then maybe sooner. Matt Martin was ready.
I have a request about the toolbox, which is,
Yeah.
we are already like way into the details here, but there's a lot of folks out there who are adamantly opposed to this at all, or that it's too much. So if there could be, and maybe you have already dialed this in, information in the toolbox about the hard facts about why we're here, and that it doesn't mean that it's going to be annexed yet, or it's a 20-year process, blah, blah, blah. That would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
So, yes, Rick. Rick's got to go.
And we're almost
Rick.
done with you, but thank you, Rick. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll follow up via email with more information on this to you guys soon, so. And then I just wanted to let you know that if you want to come by the farmer's market on Saturday or Sunday between 10 and 2, Emmy and I will be there with a little booth on the urban growth boundary. So if you're there, come say hi to us.
That's great.
Well, come on, hang with us, Brian.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
And then.
Well, I think it goes on. There's other opportunities. So if you want to take another one on in the future. Yeah.
So Scott, can I ask a general question?
Yes.
Just because as I begin discussions and dialogue with people, one of the things they say, okay, what is the benefit of being absorbed or, potential of being in the UGB? And with that, what are the expenses, are these things that like city services have to go into that? But these are private individuals with properties that say, they've said, so does that mean if I have 2 acres and I'm in the UGB now, and is it going to be, and I'm going to say this wrong or whatever the term is, but the density of what we're trying to do or has been happening within the city that people are able to take, a half an acre or a quarter of an acre and split it, 2 times. People are asking those questions and I don't know. So what are some tools in the toolbox of some things, some dialogue that we can use with people as we're having these discussions?
Right. So just being in the urban growth boundary does not, then all it means is that you're in the urban growth boundary and that you have the potential to annex into the city at the time that you choose. Doesn't mean that the city is going to come and annex your property without your willingness. We don't do that. So you could stay, somebody like is in the urban growth boundary. And, I mean, we hope that they, by being in the urban growth boundary, they eventually want to develop within the 20-year window. But if they're not prepared to do that for a while, there's nothing that says they have to go change anything at any time.
But once they do annex into the city.
Yeah. Yeah, once they annex into the city, then that changes. Then you're subject to the city's rules. Until such time you're not in the city, you're subject to the county's zoning rules.
So possibly you could have 3,500 square foot lots, right?
Depending on the zoning.
You'd have to be in the city to get those kinds of lots.
Yeah.
Once it's annexed, you can develop out the densities that are allowed in the city zoning code. But until then, thank you.
We have a question from the public.
Resident in the city. If I understand right, you incorporate all this land, 250 acres, into the urban growth zone. Then the city can annex that, but you just said people don't and opt out of being annexed in? Like John, you were saying that piece of property years ago, Dwight Howard didn't want to be part of annexing the city. So doesn't then the process have to start all over again to find that housing? Because basically this thing is about creating housing for the most part. Somebody doesn't want to we take that 250 acres, the 50 acres don't want to be annexed into the city. You got to start all over again with this process.
You don't. So I'm going to take a shot at that. You would not start all over. This is it's expanding the urban growth boundary to accommodate 20 years of growth. Somebody might not want to annex into the city for the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. If it went all the way to like 20 years or whatever point you needed to expand further, then you maybe, I wouldn't say start over. You might also look at that land and say, look, if you really don't want to be in here and there's better land to come in, you could look at swapping. But it is a multi-step process. So the first step is to include the land in the urban growth boundary. Second step is to annex. Third step is to develop. So, but it's not really a matter of starting all over because one property owner who got brought in doesn't want to develop right away because it's a long-term process and other land will likely be owned by folks who are interested in building housing and meet some of those more immediate housing needs and so on and so forth. They might very well do that. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So good question. All right, we got about a minute left. Scott, do you have any other next steps to cover?
But Chair, did you have something that you wanted?
No, I think we can do a wrap. If there's no other questions.
Okay.
Matt, really great to have you here in person.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Yep.
I'm sorry I can't be here for every meeting in person, but I was really glad to be here for this one. So yeah, and I think our plan is to get Andrew out here in front of you in person as well, so you get to see the 3D version of him too.
Yes,
So-
thank you, Andrew.
But he's better about navigating the tech than me. So if I'm back there, it's not going to be. Maybe he'll navigate from here if he's in.
Yeah, as long as the internet's working, we're okay on Zoom, but I'm not going to let Matt drive a computer. So.
Okay, then we'll adjourn the meeting and we'll look for emails from Scott. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you.